लोग निशात ज़ैदी का पेपर सुनते हैं और एक साथ we'll try and take the questions at the end of the session. Nishat again does not need any introduction. She is a professor of English at Jamia Millia Islamia, a well-known scholar, translator. She has almost 3 decades of service in various positions. And of course, she is a co-organizer of the conference. Looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you so much. So I'll straight away start. The title of my paper is Modernity, Muslim Society and the Muslim Women's Question, Saliha Abid Hussain's literary work. Hello, is this better? The dilemma of modernizing the nation on Western terms and yet retaining an essential national identity as the basis for a political claim to nationhood was resolved by the national leadership, according to Partha Chatterjee, by drawing a dividing line between the spiritual and the material, in which women were identified with the spiritual space. Muslim patriarchy woke up late to this modernizing impulse of the time. The worldwide phenomenon of Islamic modernism arrived in India on the back of the crushing defeat of Muslim imperialism by the British in 1857. The loss of Muslim rule in India, followed by the British rule, with its deployment of new tools of classification of subject population, such as demography and cartography, necessitated reimagining of the nation, national space, and their own identity on part of Muslim intelligentsia. Hard-pressed to align faith with the changed context of material conditions in which the British colonial power had uprooted much of the financial and institutional support, the Muslims in India set out on the path to reform. Yet, a section of them remained strongly opposed to the idea of education for women. Even when education for Muslim women was accepted, as in Maulvi Nazir Ahmad's writings, it was merely to groom them to the ideals of Ashraf, who had their own set of values, privileging piety, frugality, education, and self-restraint, etc. Thus, through women's education, the space of Zanana became colonized by the male authority and values. What is more important here is that, despite pressures of religious orthodoxies, social prejudices, and class and gender bias, women, through their writings, began to engage reflexively with modernity. And a host of literary journals, propelled by print culture, facilitated their creative pursuits. It is in this context that my paper aims to study fictional writings of Saliha Abid Hussain as a site to sketch out trajectories of gender discourse, debates and praxis within the Muslim community and the diverse actors involved in this debate. I argue that in reading writers like Saliha Abid Hussain, one needs to draw a distinction between the real Muslim women who are often tangentially involved in modern institutions like state administration, schools, and voluntary associations, and the Muslim women as a discursive construct that had emerged as a steady presence in public discourse in the Indian Muslim public sphere, with nearly all leading Muslim intellectuals invested in this debate surrounding this category, especially concerning what Faisal Devji calls their social and political place in society. Secondly, instead of dismissing writings by women as emotional, sentimental, and therefore not worthy of attention, as literary historiography has done for long, I argue that they should be seen as a site to probe the relationship between emotion, rationality, and gender. Thirdly, I contend that writings of Saliha Abid Hussain, like other women writers of this period, should be located within the context, other Muslim writers of this, women writers of this period, should be located within the context of Ashraf polity as it emerged in the first half of the 20th century. And lastly, I use the fictional repertoire of Saliha Abid Hussain to seek new modes of critical praxis that do not look for easy categorizations or lend empathy to text in contexts outside the templates provided by the dominant West-oriented patriarchal discourses. Acknowledging a historiographical landscape dominated mostly by male-only political actors, such an intervention teases out possibilities of reappropriation of the available archives. I have here a list of all the works that, this is not all actually, she published many more works, but at least major works that she published. And even from this, you can get a sense of the volume of writings that she did in her life. For the purpose of this presentation, I have decided to confine myself to her one novel, the first one, that is Azra, which was written between 1940 to 44 and published in 1947.
The novel undertakes a critique of traditional values. Apart from providing a detailed ethnographic account of middle Muslim class Shurafa household, some of the themes through which the novel constructs its positionality vis-a-vis modernity are family, education, and literary activities. These are also the themes, same themes that scholars like Margaret Parnell in her brilliant study, Ashraf into Middle Classes, and Sonia Amin in her work, The World of Muslim Women in Colonial Bengal, and so many others, consider crucial to the emergence of modern Muslim women. The urging of modernity manifested itself in colonies in its transformation of the domestic sphere. That the novel Azra is aimed at what Judith Walsh calls, and I quote, placing the personal, familial, emotional, and intimate in historical context, is made clear right in the opening note of the novelist, where she points out the domestic sphere of Indian Muslim came under the influence of modern culture in the beginning of 20th century, and the traditional and the modern subtly mingled, resulting in moderate views or Mahul Pasandi in place of orthodoxy or Qadamat Pasandi. Azra is an attempt to depict that. The novel presents the domestic space as a site of contesting discourses concerning conjugality, respectability, and family ideals. Conspicuous in the novel is a near absence of discord between men and women. The point of conflict rather is between those who believe in outdated customs where women were denied all subjectivity and those who believe in the true meaning of Islam and Quran, which allows them to imbibe a liberated outlook of Western education. The novel's object of castigation are those sections that blindly follow tradition, as well as those who blindly aim Western culture and chase Western education at the cost of their own culture and the tenets of their own religion. Through the couples such as Mohsin Ali and Nasima Begum, Riyaz and Hajra, Ansar and Azra, the novel presents ideal conjugal relationships marked by mutual love and respect. In contrast, we have characters like Jamila, who left her husband's home due to her quarrelsome temperament, or Muhammadi Begum, who is called in the novel Mizaj Ki Tez and dominates over her husband, Syed Sheikh Ali, a retired Tahsildar. Sheikh Ali is said to be an influential man in his service days, but now has turned into Bhigi Billi, or a domicile cat in front of his wife. Razia, who is married to Rashid, is also of domineering nature. Farooq's description of their relationship goes like this: मियाँ को कान पकड़ के उठाती बिठाती है और शहाना ठाट से रह रही है. मुझे यकीन है साल 2 साल में बेचारे रशीद का दिवालिया निकाल देगी. She makes her husband dance to her tune and lives luxuriously. I'm convinced she will bankrupt poor Rashid in a year or two. This reminds one immediately of Akbari of Miracle Urus, except that Akbari is poorly educated while Razia is English educated. At the other end of the spectrum is Zakia, who, having been raised by Jamila Begum, has no voice of her own and is now set to marry Jamil. In her essay Recasting the Woman's Question, Ruby Lal has argued that the discourses of both the colonized and the colonizers erase the historical figure of the girl child by only ever acknowledging her as a woman in future tense, that is mother, wife or nurturer. We notice this in the viewpoint of Jamila, who continues, that is Zakia's aunt, who continues to deny girlhood of Razia and assigns an always already status of womanhood to her, whose sexuality has to be controlled. And this is something that Jamila Begum repeats quite often in the novel. Jawan ladki ki nigrani karna bada mushkil hota hai. It is difficult to guard another girl. To the contrary, Nasima doesn't approve of such a suppression of young girls. Farooq contrasts Zakia's life spent in shikanja, that is tentacles, of her conservative aunt with Azra's, who has always had the freedom to express her opinions and act according to her will. Zakia's predicament is symptomatic of all Indian girls, as Azra reuse. भला हिंदुस्तानी लड़कियां हिस्टीरिया में मुब्तला ना हो तो क्या हो, जहां उन्हें इतना दबाकर रखा जाता है. Suppressed to this extent, why wouldn't Indian girls develop hysteria? Zakia thus stands for all those Indian girls whose pains have been overlooked from young age and who have developed credibility deficit as a consequence. Closely tied to the subject of domesticity and conjugality is the issue of consent. The recurrent discussions in the novel engage with the question of consent and conjugal love. Riyaz is unwilling to marry Hajra unless he is convinced that she too loves him. Ansar too seeks Azra's view before proposing to her. When Muhammadi Begum comes with her son Fahad's proposal for Azra and argues that her son is good-looking, well-educated, has a high position in the government and earns a good salary, Riyaz, Azra's brother, retorts, मैं सूरत, दौलत, तालीम और खानदान को इतनी अहमियत नहीं देता. मैं लड़के और लड़की की तबीयत की मवाफकत और पसंद नापसंदी को ज़्यादा अहमियत देता हूँ. I don't care about looks, wealth, education or family. To me, compatibility between the girl and the boy and their liking for each other is more important. Thus, the novel also presents Azra's parents, Mohsin Ali and Nasima Begum, as ideal husband and wife, and their relationship as marked by tabiyat ki yaksani aur hamkhayali, compatibility of thought and temperament. Nasima is an educated companion to her husband, a kind and charitable woman for her neighborhood, and frugal and skillful housemaker. Mohsin Ali is a bright, educated man who cares about qawm and community, and mazhab or religion. Swapna Banerjee has argued that domesticity became the new cultural logic of late colonial India, in which notions of modernity, progress, and new nation were embedded. By focusing on domesticity, the novel Azra articulates
Muslim modernity, wherein alongside nation, qawm and mazhab are preserved through the code of conduct of Sharafat. Sharafat or respectability, as Gail Minogue has argued, had come to imply during the colonial period virtues that could be acquired through education. And to be Sharif was to belong to the respectable middle class or upper middle class, and to be virtuous. This was a shift from the earlier conception of the term that referred to traits implying birth in the noble family in the sense of acquiring good character. Faisal Devji also concurs that the Shorafa, in other words, who did not exist as a community in the 19th century, created themselves in and through the colonial order as a distinct Islamic or revivalist polity, a self-creation in which their movement of women's reform necessarily participated. Education being instrumental for Sharafat, Muslim reformers laid great emphasis on it. Muslim girls' education caught the attention of Muslim reform leaders towards the end of the 19th century. And among a series of didactic literary books and periodicals that one may mention Nazir Ahmad's Miratul Rus, Altaf Hussain Hali's Majlisun Nisa, or Mumtaz Ali, who began women's magazine Tehzeeb-e-Niswa, Sheikh Abdullah began Khatoon in 1904, Ashraf Ali Thanvi wrote his monumental work Bahishti Zevar, which was published in 1905, and Aligarh Zanana Madrasa began in 1906. So all these activities, happened around the same time, and that is in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Right. The novel Azra encapsulates these debates concerning ideal education for girls and boys prevailing in the Muslim Ashraf public sphere, as they played out in the domestic realm. Right in the beginning of the novel, we are introduced to Mohsin Ali, a prize student of Aligarh Muslim University, who has earned a BA degree at a time when Muslims considered English education mayoob or disgraceful. Yet his English education did not turn him away from religion. इल्म के साथ साथ उनके दिल में सच्ची मजहबी लगन और कौमी दर्द भी मौजूद था. Along with thirst for knowledge, his heart was filled with sympathy for his community and dedication to faith. On the other hand, we have Sheikh Hassan Ali, who favors English education only as a means to grab good jobs in the government, not as a means to broaden one's outlook. In the absence of any girls' school for Ashraf girls in the Qasbah, Nasima Begum tutors her daughters at home, and the novel frequently alludes to Azra's love for reading or mutaliya. Jamila Begum, on the other hand, believes that girls should only be given basic literacy to enable them to read religious books and Quran. Her objection to modern education is primarily because it makes one la mazhab or irreligious. When Nasima's son is leaving for Aligarh for higher education, Jamila, who is Nasima's sister and therefore Riaz's aunt, she warns him not to turn a naturey and forget religion, because Sir Syed was called naturey, and therefore Aligarh, people feared that their sons would become naturey like Sir Syed. Jamila's views appear to be in sync with Muslim reformers like Syed Abul Ala Maududi, who in his book Parda and the Status of Women in Islam was overtly critical of what he considered to be detrimental effects of freedom on Western women and its irrelevance for all Muslim women. Private-public dichotomy was a structural feature of this natural hierarchy. Maududi ascribed female inferiority to what he claimed was women's essential nature, emotional, irrational, or overly sensitive. When Ansar proposes the idea of opening a school for girls, Jamila's son Jamil, despite his English education, is opposed to the idea. To him, liberty through modern education is not only wrong but also dangerous, as he believes that it will ruin family life. On the other hand, Razia, who is of modern outlook, argues in favor of gender equality. Her approach is very confrontationist, that if men treat us like this, we will teach them a good lesson. However, these extremist or confrontationist views are not the views of Ashraf moral universe, which is voiced through novel's main character. In Azra's view, औरतों को ना तो जाहिल रहना चाहिए और ना अपनी जिम्मेदारी से घबराना चाहिए. वो घरदारी भी सीखें और तालीम भी हासिल करें. ना मेम बन जाएं, ना जानवर रहें. Women should neither remain illiterate nor should they escape their responsibilities. They should learn homemaking as well as acquire modern education. They should neither ape a meme nor remain a beast. This instantly reminds one of Sir Syed, who in his travelogue Musafiran-e-London compares uneducated Indians with ugly beasts. The subject of appropriate curricula for girls' education was widely debated in colonial India. In the novel, Ansar voices these discussions as he proposes, and I quote, to open a girls' school in which a couple of old male teachers may teach, because if it's a male teacher, they have to be old. A few respectable women of the town may be invited to teach homemaking, embroidery and cooking. A couple of lady teachers will teach arithmetic and English. Faisal Devji draws attention to three main strands of arguments in the debate that ensued in Ashraf public sphere regarding the appropriate curricula for girls' education. Thanvi's curricula which set out the adab of religiously inclined person. Nazir Ahmad and Hali's curricula describe the education of any worldly well-to-do man, and Sheikh Abdullah's curriculum, with its inclusion of English, prescribes for women the conservative education of modern man. In fact, all these courses of study were meant to do for women what they did for men, that is, promote civilization and Islamization, in short, conversion. Ansar's proposal seems to be aimed at this very Muslim Ashraf agenda of new Muslim patriarchy. This is further borne out by his assertion that it is meant only for the girls of the Sharif families of the town. Ansar further proposes that the money for this proposal should be collected from aristocrats of the town. आखिर वो हैं किसके लिए? What else are they for? Ansar's views reaffirm, once again I quote Faisal G, who argues, instead of seeing in revivalism simply a Sharif reaction to colonialism, I conceive of it as a radical shift in the inter-Muslim dialogue, a shift we can identify with consolidation of North Indian Shorafa as a polity distinguishing itself against both aristocrat and plebe on the basis of true or orthodox Islam. Through Ansar, Farhat and Jamil, three young educated men who are products of Aligarh school, the novel encapsulates the politics of young educated Muslim ashraf. One important attribute of education is that it helps one control emotions. Throughout the novel, girls, having internalized the rational approach, learn to honor the Ashraf code of conduct and remain loyal to it. Thus, Azra rarely loses control over her emotions as opposed to European girls, and refers to Hindustani girls' sharmo haya to explain her reticence. However, it would be a folly to assume by this that women serve as mere auxiliaries in the discourse whose terms are set by Ashraf patriarchate. Geraldine Forbes has argued, and I quote, the first generation of educated women found a voice. They wrote about their lives. The second generation acted. They articulated the need of women. That these institutions were often conservative, as those designed by men, should not be taken as a sign that these women wish to preserve the status quo. Rather, it should be taken as the evidence that they understood their subordinate position very well. Thus, the surface narrative of the novel, determined by the ethical frame of tehzeeb and rationality, gets punctured in moments of emotional outbursts when women articulate their realms of desire. This double-voiced discourse is epitomized in Azra, a girl with a mind of her own, who, despite overtly championing the middle path in education, secretly desires an independent life free from familial obligations and devoted to social service. As she tells Hajra, मैं आज़ाद ज़िंदगी गुजारना चाहती हूँ, अपनी तालीम की तकमील करूँगी, अपना अदबी ज़ौक़ पूरा करूँगी और उसके बाद हम जिन्सों की मदद करूँगी. I wish to spend an independent life. I will complete my education, fulfill my literary aspirations, and after that work towards helping my fellow creatures. Similar assertion of self is reiterated by Azra. खुद सच्चा और सीधा समझते हो, उस पर चलने से मुझे क्यों रोको? Why do you stop me from following a path that you consider good for yourself? Even though she later retreats and agrees to adhere to Ashraf code of conduct, she reconciles to editing her husband's newspaper in his absence in order to support his cause. Her outbursts expose the potential spark that education has ignited among girls. Lata Mani has argued that the nationalist movement transfigured women into cultural sign. Famous statement of Lata Mani, where she says that women were neither the subject nor the object of these debates, they were mere sights. If nationalism did not concern itself with specific condition of women under a specific set of social relations, a cursory glance at the discourse within Muslim public sphere proves that Muslim political elites in the driving seat of Islamic modernism too refuse to concern themselves with the specific condition of Muslim women under the specific set of social relations that included asymmetrical class relations between the Ashraf and the Ajlaf. Francis Robinson points out, and I quote, women too have felt empowered, although almost invariably it has been at the cost of enduring the tensions generated between their desire and capacity to act on the one hand and the demand of patriarchy and symbolic requirements of community on the other hand.
Azra clearly manifests this tension between the desire and capacity to act and the demands of patriarchy. In a later novel by Saliha Abid Hussain, which is Yadon Ka Chirag, the protagonist Kanwal fulfills what Azra has only dreamed of. I'm not talking about that novel here. Uh, the contestation between real and discursive construction of women becomes even more apparent in the intertextual references in the novel that point towards Muslim intellectual tradition, in which the novelist wishes to locate her protagonist. Altaf Hussain Ohali is invoked by characters in the novel, more so by the central character Azra, when she closes her speech on the idea of education by quoting a few lines from Hali's Chup Ki Daad, a poem written on the request of Sheikh Abdullah of Aligarh for his magazine Khatoon, in which it was published first. Referring to this work, that is Hali's Chup Ki Daad, Faisal Devji writes, the image of passive, uncomplaining, silently sacrificing woman, in other words, was used to justify her education, was used indeed as the object of her education in the didactic works of Hali. Azra's wedding gift, among other things, contain Maulana Azad's Tafsir-e-Quran, a gift that Azra values most. In this way, the protagonist of the novel does not so much identify herself with female intellectual tradition that had emerged in the late 19th and early 20th century, with women intellectuals like Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain, who started a girls' school at Bhagalpur, Begum Jahanara Shah Nawaz, who represented Indian women in the round table in 1930s and campaigned for women's right to vote. All these women are not, the role models. Azra rather seeks affinity and allegiance to leading Muslim male intellectuals who had shaped Muslim polity and were key figures in the production of Muslim modernity. Unlike, I will skip because I also have my eyes on the watch. Azra, unlike Ansar, whose paper Azadi, her husband brings out this paper Azadi, which is political paper. It talks about Gandhian politics, and later on Ansar also gets arrested. Azra Zanana Risala, she brings out Zanana Risala. And interestingly, she brings out this risala when she has free time, because the person she is to marry has gone to England for higher education. So that is when she brings out this Zanana Risala, or women's magazine Parveen, which she starts after Ansar's departure, publishes poems, articles and stories. As her risala gains immense popularity, Azra is inundated with letters from readers, editors of women's magazines, etc. Many letters are from young aspiring male writers expressing praise for Azra. Such letters irked Azra, and she says, and the novelist says, अब उसे अच्छी तरह अंदाज़ा हो गया था कि ये अक्ल के दुश्मन समझते हैं कि जो औरत रिसाले में मजमून या नज़्म लिखे या कोई रिसाले की इदारत करे, ज़रूर उस किस्म की शौकीन और अहमक होगी जैसे ये खुद हैं. So that was the public perception of women who wrote in magazines and journals. This is rather a harsh critique of male representation of female as purely foolish and sentimental, as one may find in works of several Urdu fiction writers in early 20th century. It is also perhaps the reason why women, when they began writing, they did not publish in their own name. And we know, Nazr Sajjad Haidar published in the name of Bint Nazrul Baqar. Then we have Walida Barrister Sulaiman, or Walida Afzal Ali. This is how, they conceal their identity. Not surprisingly, while many peer women's magazines are envious, this politics is quite indicative of what was going on at that period, the kind of letters that Azra receives. A lot of women's magazines are envious of Azra's magazine Parveen, as they evidence through their letters, and thus they reflect their narrow outlook. However, Azra is very happy to receive endorsements and appreciation by senior writers like Sajjad Haidar Yildirim and Munshi Premchand. Their letters to Azra unravel the extent to which the ideal content for women readers was determined by Shorofa and nationalist patriarchy. Nothing pleases Azra like these endorsements. Yaldaram writes to Azra, he praises Azra for Baland Adabi Meyar, Suthra or Pakiza Mazak, Shagufta Sada or Dilawe Zaban. Superior literary taste, clean and chaste humor, pleasant and simple and charming language. On the other hand, Munshi Premchand praises Azra's magazines for its realistic portrayal of Indian society. Thus, Azra's claim to reason and rational attitude, as opposed to sentimental dilettantism of a woman writer, betrays her desire to enter the patriarchal bastion of intellectual order at one level. At another, it also exposes the limits of feminist contestations in which terms are dictated and determined by patriarchy. There are metafictional elements in the novel. Azra, for instance, the kind of submissions that she receives for her magazine Parveen, she reads one and she rejects it as third rate for its romantic tales. She says, "Siwa bazari, ishq, aashqi aur khayali rumani ke kuch nahi hai," and in disgust, she dumps it into the garbage bin. Thus, Azra's disgust for romances once again reaffirms allegiance to Ashraf code, where adab and akhlaq define the gender-genre ethics coagulation. At a time when progressive writers were openly challenging the Ashraf code by redefining adab and akhlaq, Azra's privileging of the sacred over the profane is indicative of our author's gender politics. Contrary to the progressives who deployed sexuality to challenge the Ashraf politics, Saliha Abid Hussain chooses to abide by this by aligning gender and with the pole of ethics on which akhlaq, adab and sharafat converge. As the nationalist politics enter the domestic sphere, Ashraf reconciliation of the sacred and secular is conceived through privileging of ethics. Sara Wahid, in her brilliant thesis, has examined the multiple forays middle-class men made into nationalist politics. The path chosen by Saliha Abid Hussain was certainly not the one that would easily succumb to West-oriented modernity and its politics of contestation. She, much like her women characters, work through forging solidarities and alliances. I have one more section, but I will skip that because I think we should keep 10 minutes for discussion. So maybe we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nishat, for a captivating and wide-ranging reading, which is also quite intensive of a single novel. I kind of enjoyed that. And okay, so as I said, I'll exercise the privilege of being chair and perhaps just make some very brief observations / questions. One is perhaps to Azra Sahiba, but to both speakers, there is a change in name. Why does that happen? When does that happen? How does it happen? Is it mentioned anywhere in the
Yes.
Yeah.
Misdaq Fatima was her name, and मैंने जहाँ तक मैं समझती हूँ सैयद आपज़ादा ये तारीख़ी नाम होगा, जैसे तारीख़ी नाम निकाले जाते हैं पैदाइश की डेट से, तो वो मिस्दाक फातिमा था और बाद में वो वैसे घर में वो मिस्दाक ही कहलाती थी। उनके जो बुज़ुर्ग थे उनको मिस्दाक कह के जिक्र करते थे कि शायद उन्होंने अपना पेन नेम सालिहा आबिद हुसैन के नाम से लिया था।
May I add something? Yeah, I think she has written about it that when she went to study in Aligarh, the girls in her class made fun of her as Miss Dark. So she came back and she argued with her mother and changed her name.
In her autobiography, yes.
Right. Okay. So this business of making fun or being made fun of also connects quite well, I think, with the other anecdote that Azra told us, which I think we all enjoyed, where she is beginning to write, and then there is this thali/thali, which is discovered. That reminded me of a story by Tagore, which is called Khata in Bengali, and it's a late 19th century story of a young girl's attempts to write, and how they are shrouded in secrecy. In the Bengali oeuvre, of course, there is a lot of now we know of the presence of these early attempts to read and write, and the secrecy with which they were conducted initially. And I was wondering, since we have been talking about this question of behind the scenes, how much of of that kind of record or knowledge do we have of corresponding processes in the Urdu, in the Urdu context, as it were, right? This question of people learning to read and write in secret, sometimes in shame, often. And perhaps this is also one space or one way of entering this question of something of this kind of transitional space, if you will, between the private and the public. So that was just a thought. Coming to the second paper, lots of questions, lots of ideas really there. I'll just make a very small point. This is about your observation regarding maqul pasandi as this kind of golden mean between tradition and modernity. I've also been thinking, it's not a very original thought, but I'm wondering, while I heard your presentation, I was wondering whether you feel that the very categories of traditional and modern turn out to be, in that sense, provisional or contingent or morphing, in a sense. How useful are they ultimately to conduct this discussion that we are conducting? If you would have any thoughts, or otherwise we'll call for other questions.
Shall we take more questions?
Okay, the floor is open to questions.
My name is Ritu Menon, and it's a question for Nishat. At the time that she was writing, you also have writers like Rashid Jahan and Chughtai, who were addressing similar questions of what is it for this young Muslim girl to encounter modernity. I was just wondering whether Saliha Abid Hussain had any contact or any kind of interaction with their writing. That's the question.
Yes. Yes, please. The lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Fatima. I teach English at Lucknow University, and my question is to Nishat. Actually, I found it very interesting that she's written her autobiography, Silsila-e Rozo Shab. कब लिखी उन्होंने, किस सन में लिखी, किस सन में लिखी उन्होंने?
ये सिलसिले रोज़, मैं अभी मुझे याद नहीं है अभी, सिलसिले रोज़ो शब, ये बहुत बाद में लिखी गई है.
I think it's in the 1980s.
80s में ही होगी, क्योंकि जब मैंने
I couldn't see that from this distance. But my question is that, you know, on the one hand, she's being assertive. That's way much later in her life. But when she writes Azra, it's 1947. And picking up from what Ritu said, I mean, Rashid Jahan had written her, you know, Angare stories. She'd written Aurat and so many more. Ismat Chughtai had written. Now, I felt from what you said in your paper that she was being rather idealistic and taking a middle path. So, also that she's throwing up many examples of many couples, you know. And then she says that the best is probably, you know, wo compatibility wali baat. So, I think she's playing rather safe. And she's also, you know, she wants to modernize. And is she by any chance overlooking the ruptures or the fractures or the fragments that may exist between the men-women relationships? Or is she just trying to negate, you know, those as being, you know, not desirable? Yeah. Thank you.
In that novel, yes.
Hello, I'm Zeba, PhD scholar from Jamia Millia Islamia. My question is to Nishat ma'am. Ma'am, how do we see Saliha Hussein's writings in the light of Virginia Woolf's lines, famous lines? A woman needs rooms of one own and money if she's to write a fiction. Because these women, like Saliha Abid Hussain, they've been writing from a very limited space and with limited agency.
वो मेंटल स्पेस तो उनको मैसर थी, वो फिज़िकल स्पेस, क्योंकि जैसे सालिहा आबिद हुसैन की ज़िंदगी पे मैंने, क्योंकि उनके और भी नावल पढ़े हैं, जो मैं कुछ कह सकती हूँ इस पर कि ये जो औरतों के कहाँ के कि सिर्फ आइडियल कपल्स थे, ये तो उनका पहला नावल था और एक्चुअली ऑटोबायोग्राफिकल किस्म का ये नावल था। तो उसमें वो अपने ख़ानदान और उसकी जो वो अंदाज़ था जो उन्हें देखा था, जैसे अशराफ का जिक्र किया। लेकिन दूसरे नावलों में जो मैं अगर पहले से तैयार करती थी, मैं बताती कि उन औरतों का भी जिक्र है कि जिनकी ज़िंदगियाँ बिल्कुल ज़ीक़ हैं, जिसके लिए वो काम करती हैं। एक नावल है जिसमें, मैं भूल रही हूँ, तुम बताओ, जिसमें गीता है जो वो गाँव में जाके काम करती है, राह अमल में वो जो बताती हैं कि वहाँ औरतों के क्या क्या मसाइल हैं। अब वो एक आइडियल सिचुएशन है कि वो गांव में जाकर काम करती है, इज़ अ सोशल वर्कर। तो उन ख़वातीन के ज़िक्र हैं जिनकी ज़िंदगियां परेशानी में हैं, जो कि मुसीबतें उठा रही हैं, कन्फ्रंट भी करती हैं। तो बाद के नावलों में उनके ये चीज़ है। लेकिन वही वो जो अच्छा असमत चुगताई और वो क्योंकि जिस ख़ानदान से वो थी और जिस तरीके के जो उन्होंने मेल कैरेक्टर्स देखे, क्योंकि वो हाली की पोती थी, वो एक इनकलाबी थे उस ज़माने के। चुप की दाद जो उन्होंने लिखी थी, तो उनके सामने वो आइडियल्स थे, वो मर्द थे कि जिसके लिए वो उन्होंने उस तरह लिखा। और वो संभल के लिखने वाली थी, कभी खुल के, कभी उन्होंने सेक्स पे नहीं लिखा, कभी उन्होंने खुल के उस तरह नहीं लिखा जैसे असमत चुगताई उस ज़माने में लिखती थी। तो उनका स्टाइल दूसरा था। वो जैसे अब मैं आपको बात बताऊं कि वो अपने हस्बैंड को, आबिद साहब को, हमेशा सर कहती थी, मोहब्बत भी बहुत करती थी, सर भी कहती थी, बहुत अच्छा उनका वो था। तो ये उस ज़माने की ख़वातीन थी जो एक ख़ास, आई थिंक वो एक ख़ास तबके से कन्फर्म करती थी, कन्फ्रंट नहीं करती थी उनसे, क्योंकि उन्होंने वही अपने घर में एक खूबसूरत सी चीज़ देखी थी, वो खूबसूरत से रिलेशनशिप देखे थे। दैट्स हाउ आई इंटरप्रेट हर वे ऑफ राइटिंग।
Can I? Right. This is questions and some comment also to Nishat particularly, and I could make out that you are making a close connection between modernism and Westernism, and also confrontationism. Confrontation is seen as something that is coming from modernity in women if they are taking to confrontation or resistance. Maybe I'm wrong, but the kind of conclusion that you were saying, that confrontation is something that is coming from modernism. But I would like to point out to, because this has been the decades in which she was coming of age and she started writing. She must be aware of the movements in which women participated. From the Swadeshi movement also, so the nationalist example, and women in the nationalist movement must also have served as example of women taking to confrontation. And there has been not Western examples, but indigenous examples of women being exemplary in resisting, and not only resisting from home and from the behind, that is through domesticity, but quite a public picketing, going to jails, women saying that Sasur Bari is a smaller bari and this is such a big space, this jail is not bothering, right? So the kind of, you see, the sentiment of resistance coming from women for their for the nation's political freedom and also for their own personal freedoms. And then, as Ritu has mentioned about Rashid and Ismat, but but by the little reading that I have done is that I could see that there is, am I taking very long? That there is a suitable literature, an ideal woman, that this suitable literature that men have kind of, they have discussed and brought about, that content, which women too were influenced. And if we can see a very close parallel to your character, your plot, Azra, the plot in Azra, and Gudar Ke Lal, that was written kind of the same kind of trope. Though both the writers, are writing separated by decades, but they are following the same line. You have also quoted Ruby Lal, and you have spoken about the continuities and the influence these didactic prescriptive texts had on women. And you can see she's writing in 1907, she's writing in 1947, and it's the kind of main line of the good women and the bad women and the ideal women and how to compromise and be a good devoted wife and who are the bad wives. All good wife, bad wife, all that is there, along with some departures. Some departures are there also in Gudar Ke Lal, some departures are here also. So how do you take it?
Shall I answer now?
Yes, I think.
The first question was yours about Mahul Pasandi and whether... The first question was about Mahul Pasandi and behind the scene and whether we have examples of this in Urdu literature. From what I understand, from what I have seen, the entire debate, I mean, majority of the debate was about English education and not so much about just education. Because as far as teaching of Quran and some basic religious teaching, there was a kind of, permissibility, because women were allowed, I mean, basic literacy, that is, Quran should be taught. And because most women writers that I have read, they were taught at home by their brothers. Their brothers received English education, their brothers received, and then the brothers also were keen to teach their sisters. And that is exactly what is portrayed in the novel as well. When brother Riaz is going to Aligarh, before leaving for Aligarh, he's worried about what will happen to my sisters. Now that I'm going, who will teach my sisters? Because he was the one who was, whatever he was learning in school, he was passing on that learning to his sisters. And before leaving, therefore, he arranges for one old Munshiji to come and teach English and arithmetic to his sisters. Right? So that is as much behind the scene. Right? There is again a discussion about these girls going to school, but the novel also sort of tracks the changes that were happening, the transitions that were happening, because it's a novel written at the cusp, right, when these changes were taking place. So there's also a reference in the novel that the older girl cannot go to school because there is no arrangement for parda in school, but the younger girl does go to school because now the schools are opening up. So for her age, she can go to school, and later on English education becomes available. So the novel is, but there are more affluent ones like Razia, who goes to Aligarh for study. So Aligarh has this arrangement for parda, but the discussion is about, not the question of whether she should go or not go, or she should study or not study, but that formal education or institutional education
is inappropriate because they will go and mingle with students of other religion, and therefore that will impact them. And then the second one is there is no proper arrangement for parda. So that these were the major concerns. Now about the progressives, that was a question that I also have been asking. That she was Abid Hussain's wife, and all these major, in 30s, Angare was published in 1933. So obviously it was even before, before Saliha Abid Hussain began writing. She began writing her first novel in 1940. Which was published in 1947, but she wrote it between 40 and 44. So Rashid Jahan and all these, four people, they had already published Angare, and there was a great furor in Ashraf society because these people, they also came from elite families. They themselves belonged to Ashraf, right? And they were breaking the code of Ashraf. So there was a lot of, Majid Daryabadi and all these leading intellectuals wrote extensively about their fahash literature, this and that, and also they were not only, rejecting. They not only rejected the definition, the Ashraf definition of adab, which is the term for literature as well as ethics, but also the ethical code as well as language, because Rashid Jahan uses rekhti, which was body language or bad language. Yeah. So the challenges came from so many, at so many levels, at the level of language, at the level of ethics, and at the level of the very definition of language. So all Ashraf intellectuals were, they set out to write against these progressives. So obviously, for a woman who comes from a traditional family, and it must have been very difficult to cross that line. And throughout her novel, we find that. But what my reading is, therefore, that it should not be rejected. For you have to read these women's writings very carefully, because they, on the surface, the narrative is one, but once you go, there are ruptures. You should read those ruptures. That is why in the last section I talked about it. We cannot deploy the same reading strategy that we have been so, trained in reading literature by women, and that's the only way we can reinstate and reclaim position for them, because otherwise we'll go by the same, same kind of convenient parameters through which we have been determining canon for a long time. So that is one reason. The other reason, which is more pragmatic and practical, could be that women, we know from the example of Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain. Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain, she even Begum Sultan Jahan, they never rejected burqa. Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain wore burqa all her life. Begum Sultan Jahan wore burqa all her life, and yet they participated in public life. Okay. The reason was that if they dropped burqa, nobody would send their girls to their school. Okay, and that is what we have in the novel. That is the problem that is presented in the novel, where Mrs. Naeem says that I have been wanting to open a girls' school for a very long time, but people say itni azad khayal hai, itni modern hai, iske school nahi bhejenge, right? So that is another reason why these women prefer to toe the middle path, right? And also, adhere to the Ashraf. But then, as I said, we need to read between the lines when we read their literature, and there are enough examples in these works to look for those signposts.
Then the next question was about Fatima's question was almost similar, which is about were they being idealistic? Were they so they were being A, practical, B, they did not want to take up this confrontationist position that progressives had taken, where they were trying to redefine adab, naya adab as they called it. They she looked for solidarities, for reconciliation, solidarities, because something constructive could only be achieved in little steps, not by simple, straightway challenge. That is one thing. Then your question about, there was also a Gandhian movement, but we have to remember that Gandhian movement was also middle path. Gandhian new movement was this bindi wearing, sari clad woman who was devoted to the husband, the ideal wife, ideal mother, and that is exactly the line, that the Ashraf told. So Ashraf idea of new woman was very similar to Gandhian idea of new woman, and even Gandhian movement, when women came out to participate actively, Gandhi's own position was that they must then go back and serve their husbands and families. So it was not like a very radical kind of position that Gandhi had regarding women. So that is what we see in this Ashraf position. It was not very radical, unlike progressives who really took a radical position, okay, as far as gender, sexuality, all that is concerned. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting discussion, I thought, and very key questions were raised and answered quite well as well. Thanks so much, everybody, and thanks to the speakers again.